You will kiss her, of course. The county expects it, and there is no sense in giving them a story before the register is dry. I know what is expected, aunt. Then do it well, said Lady Ancrum, and look at her when you do it, and for pity's sake do not look at the west window. Dominic, Duke of Fairhurst, stood in the vestry of St. Ilda's on the 4th of October with his gloves in his hand and the smell of cold stone and hot candle wax about him, and said the sentence he had been saying to himself since August. It changes nothing. She knows the terms. She has always known them, and she set half of them herself. The vestry door was open. It had been open the whole time. Judith Ray was standing on the other side of it in a dove-grey gown with her father's surveying case under her arm, because she had come from the low ground that morning and had not thought it worth going home to be idle in. "Your Grace," she said, "the curate wants you." 9 words, perfectly level, and he could not tell then and never could afterwards how much of it she had heard. By the following midsummer the Duke of Fairhurst would understand that he had kissed one woman at the altar of that church while his heart sat locked in a room at the top of his own west stair, and he would pay for it out loud at that same rail, in front of the same people. And every soul in the parish would be there to hear it. They were married at 11. She had nobody to give her away, her father being 3 years in the churchyard by the wall, so she walked up on her own, unhurried. And the congregation, 80 tenants, the county, 6 carriages from as far as Ambury, got exactly what had come for. The curate said the words. Dominic said his. Judith said hers in a clear voice that carried to the back, and when it was done he turned her by the hand and kissed her at the altar, because the county expected it, and because his aunt had told him to, and because it was the correct conclusion to a correct transaction. Her mouth was cold. So was his. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds, and there was nothing in it whatever, and the church said the way churches do, and old men beat their hands together at the back, and one of the low-ground farmers shouted something cheerful about the water. Dominic remembered that kiss the rest of his life, not for what was in it, for what was not. The bargain had been made in that same church porch in August, in the rain, and she had made it, not he. "Your Grace has a difficulty," she had said, "and I have the whole of it in my pocket. My father left me the mill leat, and 11 acres of the Sallows freehold. Your new cut cannot go anywhere but through those 11 acres. Not for love, not for money, not for an act of Parliament, because the ground rises on both sides, and you know it, and your surveyor has been 3 months telling you otherwise. You will name a price. Everyone does. I will not sell, and I will not let. The last time a Ray let land to a Fairhurst, your grandfather took it in a dry year, and my grandfather went to law and lost the roof off his head." She had looked at him with the rain coming off the porch. "Marry me, and the 11 acres come to you as my husband, and the cut can be made this winter, and the Sallows will be dry ground for the first time in 90 years. That is my offer, and there is no other on the table. You would marry a man you have never seen laugh." "I would marry a man who pays his labourers on the day and does not shoot," said Judith Ray. "I have looked at every other man within 11 miles. You are not the worst of them by a long way, and you are the only one with a river to mend." It was, he had thought at the time, the coldest piece of business he had ever transacted, and he was aware even then that she had transacted it better than he had. The wedding breakfast went on till 3. The county went home. At 10 that night the new Duchess of Fairhurst was at the deal table in the muniment room with the map and a candle, doing the thing she had done 4 nights a week for 3 years, and her husband was 2 floors above her at the top of the west stair. Unlocking a door with a key he kept on his own ring and gave to nobody. The room beyond was small and cold and perfectly kept, a portrait under a holland cloth, a writing box, a pair of grey gloves folded. And on the sill, in a plain white jug, cut that week, white roses off the wall bed in the old garden, because they were always there every year, and had been as long as he could remember, and he had never once asked how. He stood in the doorway 4 minutes and did not go in. Then he locked it again and went down. She could not leave. He worked that out much later, and it was in 3 parts, and every part of it was of her own making. She had spent her 1 card. The 11 acres were his the moment the register was signed, and no lawyer in England would give them back to a wife. The cut was not yet made. There were 11 weeks of work in it. The commissioners had not sat, and the only surveys in existence were her father's, in her hand, in a case she carried under her arm. And 80 families lived on the Sallows, and the river came up every February, and she had promised them dry ground, and Judith Ray had never in her life promised anything she did not intend to be there to see the end of. She was in the yard at 6 with the drainers, Dominic, in the yard. The Duchess of Fairhurst, in pattens, with a boot full of Sallows mud, telling a gang of navvies where to put their spoil. Was she right about the spoil? That is hardly the question. It is the only question, said Dominic, and you know she was. Lady Ancram had come for a fortnight in November and showed no sign whatever of leaving. She had the small drawing room, the best of the fires, and a settled opinion, which she distributed twice daily. You have married the steward's girl. I do not complain of it. The land had to be got. But you might teach her that a duchess does not carry her own theodolite. She does not carry it. Hoy carries it. She carries the book. The truth, which he did not say to his aunt and had not yet said plainly to himself, was that in 6 weeks the estate had begun to move under him like a boat coming off a mudbank. His wife rose 5:30 and was on the low ground by 7 in any weather, in a shawl and pattens, with her father's case and a black book. She knew the name of every family on the Sallows and the state of every gate. She dined with him at 6 because it was the only hour they both had, and she talked about the work and nothing else, and he found, with a slow and unwelcome private astonishment, that he looked forward to it. She did not touch the west stair. She never once asked about it, and he noticed that too. On the last day of November his own surveyor came up from Embury with the levels for the new cut, spread them on the table in the muniment room, and was for 11 minutes extremely pleased with himself. Straight from the mill leat to the nedder, your grace. 2,700 yards, and a fall of 4 feet 3, which is ample. It is not 4 feet 3, said Judith. The surveyor turned round with the face of a man addressed by furniture. I beg your pardon, madam. The fall from the leat sill to the mark on Ambury Bridge is 2 feet 9. You have taken your bench mark off the coping of the churchyard wall, which was rebuilt after the flood in my father's time and stands 18 inches higher than the stone it replaced. It is a common mistake. My father made it once in 1809 and paid for it out of his own pocket for 11 years. There was a silence in that room you could have leaned against. Madam, I have 30 years. Then you will know that if you cut 2,700 yards at a fall you have not got, the water will stand in the middle of it, and you will have given 80 families a mile and a half of stagnant ditch and a fever every August. There is a fall of 2 feet 9 to be had. It is enough, but only if the cut goes round the Sallow piece to the east instead of straight, which is 400 yards longer and £180 dearer, and I have had the figures since March. She put a black book on the table, opened at a page ruled by hand. Dominic looked at the pair of them, the surveyor going slowly the colour of brick, and his wife with her cuff frayed and mud to the ankle and her chin absolutely level. Take the levels again tomorrow, off the bridge mark, with her grace and Hoy standing over you, and bring me both sets. They brought both sets on the 2nd of December. She was right by 1.5 feet. You will want me to say something handsome, said Judith afterwards, wiping her hands in the doorway. I should like to, and I do not know the form of words. There is not one. My father never got one either, in 26 years, and he mended this estate twice. She said it without any bitterness at all, which he minded more than if she had thrown something. Pay the £180 and let it be dug the right way. That will do for handsome. Lady Ancram said at dinner that it was very well to be clever, but that one did not like to see it, and Judith said, passing the salt, no, ma'am. My father used to say a woman's cleverness is like a drain. Everybody is glad of it, and nobody wants to look at it. And Lady Ancram, to her eternal credit, laughed until she had to set down her glass. It was on the 11th of December that the thing happened which Dominic could not explain. He could not sleep. He went up the west stair at 1:30 with a candle, as he did perhaps 6 times a year, and unlocked the door and stood in it. The room was cold and swept. The holland cloth was straight on the portrait. The gloves lay folded where they had lain for 10 years. And on the sill in the plain white jug, there were fresh cut stems, and the water in the jug was clean, and there was a thin ring of damp on the stone where somebody had set it down not many hours before. Dominic stood there with his candle and worked it the way he worked at a column of figures. The walled garden had been grubbed in the bad year. He had signed the order himself, could see the paper in his mind. Kitchen crops in the wall bed, the borders to grass, the jobbing man discharged. That was 5 years ago at least. There ought not to be a white rose on the place at all in December, and here were 3, small and half open and perfectly fresh, and the water was clean, and somebody's thumb had left a mark in the dust on the sill and wiped it away again. Somebody came up here. Somebody had been coming up here for years, and he had never once asked, because the roses had always been there, and a man does not ask about a thing that has always been there. He locked the door and went down and looked, on the way, over the stair-head rail into the well of the house. There was one light still burning, 2 floors below, in the muniment room, where his wife was working out the cost of 400 yards. Give me the case. It is not heavy, your grace. It is heavy at the 3rd gate, and you know it. Give me the case, Judith, or I shall be obliged to take it, and then Hoy will tell the whole parish that we struggled in a field. She gave him the case. It was the 14th of January, the ice standing in the ruts, and they walked the length of the new cut with the drainers' fires smoking behind them while she talked for 2 miles about spoil banks. He carried the case every day after that. It became a thing, the way things do in a house. On the 11th of February the Nedda came up as it always came up, and 11 farms that had been under 2 feet of water every winter since anybody could remember stayed dry. And Dominic stood on the bank at 7 in the morning with his wife beside him and watched a farmer take his hat off and hold it against his chest and say nothing at all. That is your father's. It is his levels, said Judith. It is my 400 yards. He tried at the end of that month to say something else and made a poor business of it. You may dine at any hour you please. I should be glad if you dined with me when there is nothing to say as well. That is very kind. It is not kind. Judith, I am trying to tell you I would rather you were in the room. She looked up from the soup, and there was something in her face for a moment that he had never seen there, and then it was gone. You are not obliged to like me, your grace. We made a bargain in a church porch, and I am content with it, and I would rather have it kept plainly than dressed up on a Tuesday. Eat your soup. She was in the doorway before he understood that he had been refused, and it was 6 weeks more before he understood why. 2 things arrived in April. The first was a notice from the clerk to the Commission of Sewers at Ambury. The mill interest of that town, 9 wheels on the Nedda above the bridge, had petitioned against the Fairhurst cut, alleging that it drew off water in a dry summer and would ruin their trade. And the commissioners would sit upon the objection at the Sessions House at Ambury at 11 in the morning on the 12th day of June, and would confirm the cut or order it stopped and filled in. Filled in, said Dominic. They can do it. They did it at Sallowford within living memory, said Judith. The gauge readings are the whole of the case. My father kept the Nedda gauge 19 years, twice a day, in a book. I have kept it since. If that book is not in that room on the 12th of June, we may as well drown the Sallows ourselves. The second thing arrived the same afternoon in the person of his aunt, who came into the muniment room without knocking in a state he had not seen since his mother's funeral. Corisande Ford is at Ambury. The pen went on for perhaps 3 words and then stopped. Say that again. Mrs. Ford. Corisande. She has taken the Wick House on a 3 years' lease and came into it on Thursday with 4 servants and a great deal of black crape. Ford died at Lisbon in September of a fever and left her the whole of it. She is a widow, Dominic. She is 28, and she is 11 miles from this door. Judith Ray did not look up from the gauge book. Pen went on quite steadily, and the only thing that happened in her face was that it stopped altogether, the way a shutter goes across a lantern. Then somebody ought to call, she said. It would look very strange in the county if nobody from Fairhurst called upon a widow at the Wick House. Your Grace will do as he thinks right. He generally does. She took her book and went out. 10 years before, on the 12th of June, at 11 in the morning, Dominic had stood at the altar of St. Ilda's with the ring in his glove and the church full, and had been handed a letter in the vestry instead of a bride. He had read it standing up and gone out and told the congregation himself. because there was nobody else to do it, and he had ridden back to Fairhurst and shut a room at the top of the west stair, and had not been the same man since, and nobody in 3 parishes had ever said the date out loud in his hearing again. The commissioners would sit at 11 in the morning on the 12th of June. He looked at the notice for a long time, and then at the ceiling 2 floors up, where a jug of white roses stood on a windowsill in a locked room, and he thought for the first time in 10 years that he did not know how they got there. You have had that page open 20 minutes, and there is nothing on it but rain. There is a great deal on it, said Judith. There is 19 years of rain. They worked at the gauge book through May, at the long table, with the windows open on the smell of cut grass. 19 years of the Nedda read twice a day in her father's small hand, 3 years in hers, and Dominic ruling the columns, because it was the one part of the business he could do without being told. The millers will swear we take their water, she said. The book says we take 4.5 inches out of a river that has never in 19 years gone below 11. That is the case. It is only arithmetic, and it will hold provided somebody is in that room to say it. We shall both be in that room. Yes, said Judith, and went on ruling. He told her about it on the last Sunday in May, walking back from church, and he had never told anybody, because there had never been anybody to tell. You know what the 12th of June is. Everybody within 9 miles knows what the 12th of June is. Then you know I stood in that vestry with a letter in my hand and had to walk out and tell 300 people myself. I have never spoken of it. I have spent 10 years being a man that a thing happened to. He stopped at the stile. I am telling you now because I find I do not want a locked room between us. That is all. I have made a bad job of it. Judith stood on the step of the stile, which put her eye to eye with him for once. Thank you. That was not nothing. Ask me again in July. Ask you what? Whatever it is you've been trying to ask me since February, said Judith Ray. Get the cut confirmed. Then ask. She put her hand for one moment flat against his chest, not a caress, the gesture you make to steady somebody at a stile, and took it away and walked on. And he stood there like a fool with his heart going and the church bells still on. That was the 28th of May. He had a fortnight. The rent dinner at Fairhurst was on the 11th of June. 60 tenants in the long barn, trestles, cold beef, the county gentleman at the top table, and the Duchess at the foot of it among 3 Sallows farmers, being told about a heifer. Dominic watched her down the length of the barn and thought he had never in his life been so near to contentment. The note came at 9 on a tray, in a hand he had not seen for 10 years. I have been at Embury 8 weeks and you have not come, and I do not blame you. I go to Bath on Friday and shall not come back. There is one thing you were never told, and I am the only person living who can tell it, and I find I cannot go without saying it. Do not answer this. Either you will come or you will not. See. He read it twice at the top table with the noise of 60 tenants round him. He should have put it in his pocket. He knew it that night. He knew it a great deal better afterwards. He should have put it in his pocket and gone down the barn and sat with the Sallows farmers and got up at 6 with his wife and driven to Ambury. He got up from the table and called for a horse. Judith saw him go. She was standing at the foot of the trestles with a jug in her hand, and he passed within 4 feet of her, and she said, Your Grace, and he said, something at Embury. I shall be back before morning, already turning away as he said it, and the last thing he saw as he went out of the barn was his wife setting the jug down very carefully, as though it might break if she did not attend. The Wick house was lit and quiet. Corisande Ford was thinner than she had been and dressed in black, and she stood up when he came in and did not offer him her hand. You came. You knew I would. I hoped. That is different. She sat down. Dominic, my father owed £19,000 to Ford's house and had pledged the Ambury mills against it. I was told on the 9th of June at 11 at night that if I married you the whole of it would be called in the following week and my mother would go to a lodging in Boulogne. Ford stood in my father's book room and said it in front of me. I wrote you that letter at 2 in the morning with my father dictating the last 3 lines. The clock struck 11 while she was still speaking, and he did not hear it. He heard everything else. The 10 years at Lisbon, the fever, what a woman does with the middle of her life when it has been spent for her. He sat in that drawing room until the candles wanted snuffing, and then until the birds started, and then until the light came grey through the shutters, because 10 years of his own history was being taken to pieces in front of him and built again in another shape. At 10:30 in the morning Corisande Ford said quite gently, "It is Tuesday, the 12th. Was there not something you told me last night about a hearing?" Dominic, Duke of Fairhurst, came out of his chair as though the floor had gone. He rode the 11 miles in 51 minutes and came into the yard of the Sessions House at Ambury with the horse blowing and the church clock going 12:15, and the crowd already coming down the steps. She had been in that room since 11 o'clock, alone with her father's book. They have adjourned till 2. The Millers have had all morning and they mean to have half the afternoon as well. "Judith, you will sit at the back," said his wife. She stood on the steps of the Sessions House at Ambury with her father's gauge book against her chest and her bonnet strings in a knot, and she had been in that room since 11 o'clock with 9 Millers, 4 attorneys, and a bench of commissioners who had twice invited her to withdraw and let a gentleman speak for the estate. "Let me go in with you. You may go in. You may not go in with me." She said it without heat, which was the terrible part. "I have been on my feet in there since 11, and I have not made one mistake. And if you come up that room now with your hat in your hand, every man in it will decide that the last hour was a woman filling in until the Duke arrived. Sit at the back, Your Grace. It is the only useful thing left. I know where you were. Hoy took the gig for me at 6 and I sent nobody to find you, because I knew, and I would rather have been wrong." She turned. 2 o'clock. Dominic sat at the back of the Sessions House for 2 hours and 40 minutes and did not say one word, and it was the longest and most useful afternoon of his life. They put her through it. The Millers' Counsel was a heavy, courteous, patient man who had ruined better witnesses than a duchess in pattens, and he began where such men begin. "This book, madam, who kept it?" "My father, Thomas Ray, steward of Fairhurst, from the 9th of March 19 years since until the week he died. Twice a day, 7 in the morning and 7 at night, off the iron staple in the second pier of Ambury Bridge. I have kept it since, in the hand he taught me, at the same hours. You ask these gentlemen to determine the trade of 9 mills upon a private memorandum in a woman's hand. I ask these gentlemen to determine it upon 19 years of readings which any man here may go and check against the staple this afternoon, since it has not moved," said Judith. "But if the book is of no value because of the hand it is written in, I would ask the bench to note that the mill interest has produced no book at all." Somebody in the body of the hall laughed, and the chairman did not stop him. She gave them the arithmetic in 11 minutes. The Ned at Ambury Bridge had not in 19 years stood lower than 11 inches over the sill in August, drought or no drought. The Fairhurst leak drew 4.5. She read the driest August of the 19 day by day, then the wettest, then the year the mills had petitioned before and lost. When the council put it to her that a lady could hardly be expected to allow for the summer draw of the sallow piece, she said, "I allowed for it on page 11, sir, in red ink, in 1817, and turned the book round for the bench to see. They gave their determination at 10 minutes past 4. The objection dismissed, the cut confirmed, the mill interest to pay the costs of the day. 80 families on the Sallows would sleep dry that winter and every winter after, and the woman who had done it stood up and put her book under her arm and thanked the bench and walked out of that room alone. He caught her in the yard, where the gig was waiting and Hoy already at the horse's head. "You were magnificent. I was accurate. It is not the same, and I do not want the other word from you today. Then what may I say?" She looked at him with the June sun on her face, and there was no anger in her anywhere, and that was how he knew. "You may listen. I am going to my cousin at Marle on Friday. She keeps a school and has wanted somebody for the accounts and the land these 2 years, and I have written to say I will come. The cut is confirmed and cannot be filled in now by anybody. The 11 acres are yours and cannot come back to me. I have finished what I promised the Sallows. There is nothing left in this business that requires me to be at Fairhurst, and there never was anything else that did. There is me. You went to Ambury last night, said Judith, and I was not surprised. Do you understand? Not angry, not astonished, not even hurt in the way I expected. I stood in that barn with a jug in my hand and I thought, yes, of course, there it is. A woman may be married to a man 9 months and find she has never once been surprised by him, and that is a cold discovery to make at a rent dinner. It is not that your heart was elsewhere, Dominic. It is that I always knew exactly where it was, and I laid the table round it for 9 months, and I would have gone on doing it for 30 years, and I find suddenly that I cannot. She got up into the gig. Do not come to Marl. If you come to Marl, I shall be very glad to see you, and that is the whole difficulty. He rode home the long way and got in at 9. The house was quiet. His aunt had gone up. He climbed the west stair with a candle and unlocked the door, and the white roses on the sill were 3 days cut and beginning to go over, and there was nobody to change them, and it struck him then, standing in a cold room on the 12th of June, that he did not know who had ever changed them. He went down to the garden house and got Hoy out of his supper, the wall bed, the white roses at the end by the arch. Who has the keeping of them? Hoy looked at his boots. Hoy was 61 and had been at Fairhurst since he was 9. Nobody, your grace, in the way of the garden. They were to be grubbed with the rest in the bad year. Your grace signed the order and the jobbing man was put off at Lady Day. Then how is there a rose in that room every June and every Christmas, and so far as I can make out every fortnight in between? The old man went into the shed and came back with a greasy book with a string round it, and set it on the bench under the lantern, and turned to a page near the front, and put his thumb beside an entry. Because when the order came, sir, Miss Ray came down here to me the same week, and said the beds might go, but the wall bed would not, and she has paid me 3 shillings a year out of her own wages to keep it and cut it ever since. There it is, 11 year of it, her name at every one. Dominic set the candle down on the bench, because his hand was not steady. Ray J, for the white roses, 3s. 11 times in a gardener's spelling in a gardener's book. 3 shillings a year out of a steward's daughter's wages. Paid to keep alive the flowers of the woman who had left him at the altar. Carried up a locked stair on a date nobody in the parish would say aloud, by a girl of 19, and a girl of 20, and a girl of 21. So that when he opened that door once a year the room would look as though somebody still loved him. You have come to say goodbye, and you might have written it. I have come to ask you one question, said Dominic, and to bring you these. He put the writing box on the table at the Wick House at 9 in the morning on the 13th of June. Her letters, all of them, and the grey gloves, and the portrait out of its frame and rolled, because it was her own face and had no business hanging under a holland cloth in another woman's house. What is the question? In 10 years did you ever send anybody to Fairhurst? A servant, a message, anything at all? Not once. I did not think I had the right. Corisande looked up. Why? Because there have been white roses in that room every June for 11 years, and I have let myself believe it was my grief keeping itself tidy. It was not. It was a girl with 3 shillings a year. Corisande Ford was quiet a moment, and then did a thing he had not expected. She laughed, and it was not unkind, and her eyes were wet. Then go home, Dominic, and be quick about it. You did not spend 10 years mourning me. I have known that since I came into this county. You spent 10 years mourning a morning in a church, and somebody has been dusting it for you. He went home and opened the west room and took the shutters off, and carried the chair and the sill jug down himself, and gave the key to nobody, because there was nothing left to lock. Then he went to the curate. The congregation of St. Ilda's on the 15th of June was the largest since the wedding, because by Saturday night it was known in 3 parishes that the Duchess had one at Ambury alone, that the Duke had not been there, and that she was going to Marl on Friday. The county came to see. The Sallows came because the Sallows would have come through fire. Judith Ray came in at 5 to 11 and sat where she always sat, 4 rows back on the aisle, in the grey gown. After the blessing, Dominic stood up. The curate has given me leave for 5 minutes, and I shall not want more. I would rather say this here than have it said for me in Ambury. The church went absolutely still. 9 months ago I was married at that rail. Many of you were here. I kissed my bride in front of you because it was expected of me, and there was nothing in it, and she knew there was nothing in it, 'cause an hour before I had stood in that vestry and told my aunt that the marriage changed nothing. The door was open. My wife heard me. She has never once thrown it at me in 9 months, and I have thought about that a great deal these 3 days. Nobody moved. On the 12th of June, at 11 in the morning, while my wife stood alone before the commissioners at Ambury with her father's book, defending the cut that keeps 80 families in this parish out of the water, I was 11 miles away in another house. I have no excuse. I had a summons out of my own past and I went to it. She went into that room by herself and won it by herself. And every one of you will be dry this February because of a woman this county has called the steward's girl since October. He turned and looked at the 4th row. That is the first thing. The second is worse. For 11 years there has been a room at the top of my west stair kept exactly as it was on the day I was jilted at this rail, with white roses on the sill, and I let myself believe those roses were my own faithfulness. I grubbed that garden myself in the bad year. I signed the order, and Judith Ray went down to Hoy the same week and paid 3 shillings a year out of her own wages to keep the wall bed alive, and cut them, and carried them up that stair, and dusted a room she was never invited into, from the time she was 19 years old. Because she could not bear that the thing I loved should look neglected. There was a sound in that church like a sigh going along a hedge. My heart has been in that room for 10 years, and my wife has been keeping it warm for me. She has never asked me for one thing in return. On Tuesday she told me, quite kindly, that she goes to Marl on Friday, and she is entirely right to go. He came out of the pew and walked to the chancel step and stood at the rail, alone. I have done 3 things this week, and they are all on paper at Ambury. The 11 acres of the Sallows are reconveyed and settled upon Judith Ray to her sole and separate use, free of the control of any husband, hers to sell or keep or leave as she chooses. The Nedder Gage book is entered in the commissioner's records under her father's name and her own. And the room at the top of the west stair is open, the shutters are off it, and there is nothing in it now but a table and the light. Then Dominic, Duke of Fairhurst, said the rest of it to one person, in a church holding 300. I married you in this place and I kissed you at that rail with my heart somewhere else, and you have known it every day since and fed me at 6 o'clock regardless. I have no bargain left to offer. The land is yours, the cut is confirmed, the county is on your side and not mine, and if you go to Marl on Friday you will be right, and I shall not follow you and pester a schoolmistress. But I am going to say the words again, properly at this rail, in front of these people, to the woman I actually love. If you would rather not answer them, you have only to sit still, and nobody in this parish will think one whit the less of you. He said them. All of it, from the beginning, in a voice that shook twice and did not stop. Judith Ray sat in the 4th row, for what the sexton afterwards saw was a full half-minute. Then she got up and came out into the aisle and walked to the rail and said, "I will," in the clear voice that had carried to the back 9 months before. And the Duke of Fairhurst kissed his bride at that altar for the 2nd time in his life. And this time the church did not say "Ah," because most of it was crying. She did not go to Marl. She wrote to her cousin instead, and sent her the name of a very good young man at Ambury who wanted the work and paid his first quarter herself, which was exactly like her. The Sallows were dry that February and every February after. The Gages read at 7 and 7 to this day, by whoever is nearest, in a book kept in the room at the top of the west stair, which has the tithe map on the wall and the window open in all weathers, and is the warmest room in that house. The white roses were moved out of the wall bed and set along the arch over the garden door, where anybody who comes to Fairhurst may see them, and every June, when they come out, the Duke of Fairhurst cuts them himself and carries them in, and has never once, in all the years since, needed to be told whose they are.